August 23, 1942. Stalingrad. Hauptmann Klaus Hoffmann pressed his eye to the scope of his Mauser Kar 98K, scanning the rubble-strewn landscape below. 3 weeks ago, he had been Germany's third-ranked military sniper, credited with 127 confirmed kills across Poland, France, and the Eastern Front. He had trained at the elite Zossen sniper school, mastered ballistics, windage, and camouflage techniques that made him nearly invisible in open terrain. What he saw through his scope now made none of that matter. The city of Stalingrad stretched before him, and it was already dead. The Luftwaffe's bombing raid that morning had killed an estimated 40,000 civilians and transformed the urban landscape into something from Dante's Inferno. But Hoffmann wasn't looking at destruction. He was looking at the spaces between the destruction, the shadows, the 1,000 hiding places that hadn't existed before the bombs fell. In 3 hours, his spotter would be dead, killed by a shot from a direction they never identified. In 6 days, Hoffmann himself would be wounded by a Russian marksman who never saw. And in 5 months, he would be among the 91,000 German soldiers who surrendered in the frozen ruins, having learned that everything the Wehrmacht knew about warfare had become obsolete in the maze of rubble that Stalingrad had become. The confidence of the German army approaching Stalingrad in August 1942 was born from 2 years of unprecedented military success. The Wehrmacht had conquered France in 6 weeks, driven deep into the Soviet Union, and appeared unstoppable. Their sniper doctrine, refined through centuries of German military tradition and perfected in the opening years of World War II, emphasized precision, discipline, and systematic training. The German sniper was an artisan of death, a specialist who received 150 hours of dedicated training beyond basic infantry qualification. At the Zossen Sniper School south of Berlin, candidates learned advanced ballistics, range estimation, camouflage techniques, and most importantly, patience. German sniper doctrine emphasized the carefully selected shot, the single bullet that eliminated a high-value target from extreme range. A German sniper was expected to observe for hours, move slowly, and fire only when certain of his shot. This methodology had produced legendary marksmen like Matthias Hetzenauer, credited with 345 confirmed kills, and Josef Sepp Allerberger with 257 kills. These men represented the pinnacle of German sniper excellence, trained to dominate battlefields through superior optics, superior training, and superior discipline. The Mauser Kar 98K rifle was the instrument of this precision. Fitted with various scopes, most commonly the Zeiss Zielvia 4X or the IJAK 4X, the weapon was accurate to 800 meters in the hands of a trained marksman. The rifle itself was a masterpiece of German engineering, manufactured to tolerances measured in hundreds of millimeters, with hand-selected barrels that provided exceptional accuracy. German snipers operated in pairs, a shooter and a spotter. The spotter using a 10x SF-14Z scissor telescope to identify targets and calculate range. This system had proven devastatingly effective in every campaign. In France, German snipers had terrorized Allied positions, making officers afraid to look through binoculars. In the opening phases of Operation Barbarossa, they had illuminated Soviet officers and commissars with surgical precision, contributing to the Red Army's catastrophic early defeats. The typical German sniper engagement occurred at ranges of 300 to 600 meters, distances where German optics and training gave them overwhelming advantage. They fired from concealed positions in forests, from church steeples in villages, from carefully prepared hides in fields. They dominated open ground, making it death for Soviet soldiers to advance across the endless steppes. On September 13, 1942, when the 71st Infantry Division and 24th Panzer Division entered the suburbs of Stalingrad, German snipers expected to apply these same tactics to urban terrain. They anticipated firing down from intact buildings, dominating intersections, controlling the high ground. What they discovered instead was that Stalingrad had no high ground anymore, no intact buildings, no clear lines of sight. The Luftwaffe bombing and subsequent artillery had transformed the city into something unprecedented in military history. Buildings that once stood 5 and 6 stories tall had been reduced to 2 stories of ruins, topped with 3 stories of rubble. Streets had vanished under collapsed masonry. What had been a city of 400,000 people, spread across 25 miles along the Volga River, was now a landscape of craters, twisted metal, and pulverized concrete. And in this landscape, every assumption of German sniper doctrine became worthless. The Soviet defenders of Stalingrad had something the Germans didn't expect: intimate knowledge of the terrain before it was destroyed, and a desperate willingness to turn that destruction into a weapon. General Vasily Chuikov, commander of the 62nd Army defending Stalingrad, understood immediately that conventional warfare was impossible. His forces were outnumbered, outgunned, and facing the best army in the world. So he invented something new. The Soviets called it Rattenkrieg, rat warfare. The Germans would soon have another name for it: the meat grinder. Chuikov's tactical innovation was brutally simple: eliminate the German advantages in artillery, air power, and armor by fighting so close to the enemy that these weapons became useless. Soviet doctrine called for positions no more than 50 meters from German lines, close enough that German artillery couldn't fire without hitting their own troops, close enough that Stukas couldn't dive bomb without endangering German soldiers. But this proximity required a transformation in how soldiers fought and where they positioned themselves. The ruined city provided the perfect environment for this new warfare. What had been apartment buildings became vertical mazes. A German patrol might control the ground floor while Soviets held the basement and second floor. Water pipes, sewers, and cellars became highways that allowed Soviet troops to move unseen beneath German positions. The Soviets pioneered the use of storm groups, small teams of 8 to 10 soldiers who specialized in close-quarters combat. Each group included riflemen, a machine gunner, anti-tank rifle specialists, sappers with explosives, and, critically, snipers. These groups operated with frightening effectiveness in terrain where German numerical and technological superiority meant nothing. A German company, 200 men strong with machine guns and mortars, might be ambushed by a Soviet storm group in a factory corridor 20 meters wide. In such conditions, training and equipment mattered less than desperation and intimate knowledge of the ruins. The transformation of German snipers from hunters to hunted began in the first days of street fighting. Obergefreiter Ernst Koenig, a sniper with the 24th Panzer Division, who had 37 confirmed kills entering Stalingrad, recorded his experience in a diary later captured by Soviet forces. September 16th, we advanced into the Zaitsev Gorge sector. My spotter and I took position in what remained of a grain elevator, excellent visibility down 3 streets. Within an hour, my spotter was dead. The bullet came from behind us, from rubble we had cleared 30 minutes earlier. I never saw the shooter. Spent the night in the same position, terrified to move. We had been taught to relocate after every shot. Here, movement is death. Koenig's experience was replicated across German sniper teams. The Wehrmacht's tactical manual called for snipers to change position after 1 or 2 shots to avoid counterfire. In Stalingrad, there was nowhere to change position to. The rubble that provided concealment also created countless firing positions for the enemy. A Soviet sniper could fire from a pile of bricks that looked identical to 10,000 other piles of bricks. By the time German forces identified the position and brought fire to bear, the Soviet shooter had vanished into the ruins. The Soviets were developing their own sniper doctrine in real time, born from desperation and refined through brutal experience. Unlike the German emphasis on long-range precision, Soviet snipers in Stalingrad fought at ranges of 50 to 200 meters, distances where any soldier with basic marksmanship could achieve kills. What mattered wasn't the perfect shot, but the unexpected shot, the bullet from the flank, from above, from below, from anywhere in the three-dimensional maze of ruins. Soviet sniper training before Stalingrad had been minimal. Many Red Army soldiers had never fired a rifle before conscription, but the defenders of Stalingrad included factory workers who knew the industrial complexes intimately, women who had worked in the buildings now turned to fortresses, and men who'd grown up in the city's neighborhoods. This local knowledge became a combat multiplier, beyond anything in German tactical doctrine. When Soviet forces fell back into the Red October steel factory, the Barakadi gun factory, and the Dzerzhinsky tractor factory, German soldiers entered industrial complexes that their enemies knew by memory. The factories became the ultimate expression of Rattenkrieg. The Red October factory covered over 2 square miles of industrial terrain, a nightmare landscape of blast furnaces, conveyor systems, machine shops, and assembly halls, all of it now partially destroyed, but still structurally complex. Soviet workers who had operated these facilities now defended them, knowing every maintenance tunnel, every crawl space, every hidden passage. A German infantry company advancing through the factory might find itself taking fire from overhead pipes where Soviet soldiers had positioned themselves, from below through grated floors, from inside machinery that appeared destroyed but concealed perfectly functional firing positions. The three-dimensional nature of factory fighting rendered traditional military training nearly useless. German officers trained to read terrain, identify key ground, and maneuver forces found themselves in environments where none of these skills applied. A room might have 7 entrances, 3 doors, 2 blown-out walls, a hole in the ceiling, and a crack in the floor. Defending or attacking such spaces required completely new tactics, and the Soviets were inventing them faster than the Germans could adapt. It was in this environment that Soviet snipers became legendary. The most famous was Vasily Zaitsev, a deer hunter from the Ural Mountains who arrived in Stalingrad in September 1942 as a simple infantryman. Zaitsev had grown up hunting in the forests of the Urals, learning to track animals and shoot from his grandfather. He understood patience, concealment, and the critical importance of remaining absolutely still. In the ruins of Stalingrad, these hunting skills proved devastatingly effective. Within weeks, Zaitsev had killed dozens of German soldiers. By October, his confirmed kill count exceeded 50. By the end of the battle, the number would reach 225,000, though the actual count was likely higher. But Zaitsev's importance went beyond personal achievement. He became an instructor, training other Soviet soldiers in sniper techniques adapted specifically for urban ruins. The Zaitsev method emphasized several principles that contradicted German doctrine, but proved perfect for Stalingrad. First, concealment over camouflage. In rubble, trying to blend in was less important than being absolutely still. Second, unconventional positions. Never shoot from where the enemy expects fire. Third, patience, measured in days, not hours. A sniper might observe a German position for 3 days before finding the perfect moment to fire. Fourth, psychological warfare. Make the enemy afraid of every shadow, every pile of bricks, every moment of visibility. Zaitsev established sniper schools in the basements of ruined buildings, training sessions conducted under bombardment, where students learned to shoot while exhausted, hungry, and terrified. The course lasted 5 days, when it could have taken months in peacetime, but it produced functional snipers who understood Stalingrad's unique demands. Students learned to identify German sniper positions by watching for tiny details, a scope's glint, disturbed brick dust, even the faint smell of German tobacco that was distinctively different from Soviet mahorka. They learned the critical zones of the city, where German snipers liked to position themselves, what times of day offered the best light for shooting. They learned that a sniper in Stalingrad didn't need to be an exceptional marksman. He needed to be invisible, patient, and ruthless. Zaitsev himself preferred to shoot German officers and specialists, artillery observers, machine gunners, and especially other snipers. Each confirmed kill earned Soviet snipers recognition, with a board posted in Soviet positions tracking sniper scores. This gamification of killing served a practical purpose, maintaining morale in hell. When soldiers are living in rubble, eating frozen horse meat when lucky, and sleeping in shifts because the position might be overrun at any moment, the sniper board provided something to fight for beyond mere survival. The psychological impact on German forces was devastating. Wehrmacht soldiers who had advanced across Europe with confidence now moved through Stalingrad in terror. Every window could conceal a shooter. Every pile of rubble might hide an enemy. Every moment of visibility could be death. German infantry developed tactics to minimize exposure. They moved in short rushes, never the same distance twice. They avoided any predictable pattern. They communicated with hand signals because talking revealed positions. They learned to hate crossing any open space, even 10 meters. But no amount of caution could eliminate the threat. Soviet snipers were achieving kill ratios that defied military logic. A single Soviet marksman might kill 10 or 15 Germans before being located and eliminated, if he was eliminated at all. Some Soviet snipers operated for weeks without being discovered. The Germans called them ghosts, unseen killers, who seemed to fire from everywhere and nowhere. Obergefreiter Koenig, the German sniper whose diary documented the battle, wrote in late October, "We no longer hunt. We are hunted. I have been in the same position for 4 days, unable to move because I know they are watching. My mission was to eliminate a Soviet sniper estimated to have killed 30 of our men. I have fired twice in 4 days. Both shots missed because I am rushing, taking shots I would never have taken before Stalingrad. The Russian doesn't rush. He waits. I found my spotter this morning with a bullet through his head. The shot was taken from less than 50 meters, but I never heard it, never saw muzzle flash. How do you fight this?" The German army's solution was to deploy their own best snipers to Stalingrad, with explicit missions to hunt Soviet marksmen. This led to legendary sniper duels that Soviet propaganda would later dramatize, though the reality was more complex than the myths. When elite German snipers like Heinz Thorwald and Erwin Koenig, yes, another Koenig, no relation to the Obergefreiter, arrived in Stalingrad, they brought the full weight of German sniper training and equipment. These were men with hundreds of confirmed kills, masters of their craft. They should have dominated Soviet snipers who had mere weeks of training. Instead, they discovered that in Stalingrad, experience fighting on the steppes was a disadvantage. Everything they had learned about range estimation assumed relatively flat terrain and clear lines of sight. In the ruins, ranges were deceptive. What looked like 200 meters might be 150 because rubble distorted perception. Their carefully calibrated scopes, perfect for long-range shooting, were often too powerful for the close-range snapshots that Stalingrad demanded. Most critically, their training emphasized individual excellence, while Soviet snipers operated as part of storm groups that could support and protect them. The most famous sniper duel, between Zaitsev and a German marksman, Soviet propaganda called Major Koenig, though no such officer's existence was ever confirmed, illustrated the transformation of sniper warfare in Stalingrad. According to Soviet accounts, this duel lasted 3 days in the Mamayev-Kurgan area in November 1942. The German sniper, supposedly the head of the Zaitsev sniper school, was sent specifically to kill Zaitsev. The duel became a chess match in rubble, each sniper trying to anticipate the other's position, each one patient enough to wait days for a single shot. Whether Major Koenig existed or was Soviet propaganda is debated by historians. No German military records confirm his identity. But what isn't debatable is that such duels occurred constantly throughout Stalingrad. Anonymous Soviet and German snipers engaged in lethal games of patience and skill. What gave Soviet snipers the advantage wasn't superior marksmanship or equipment. The Mosin-Nagant rifle they used was reliable but hardly precision-crafted like German weapons. The PU scope was adequate but optically inferior to German glass. Soviet advantage came from three factors. First, they fought in a city they knew intimately, in factories where they had worked, in neighborhoods where they had lived. Second, they had nothing to lose. German snipers fought for conquest. Soviet snipers fought for survival, for their homes, for revenge against invaders who had destroyed everything they knew. This psychological difference manifested in tactical aggression that German snipers, trained in caution and precision, struggled to counter. Third, and most critically, Soviet snipers understood that in Stalingrad, the city itself was a weapon. Every pile of rubble could be a position. Every shadow could conceal a shooter. The Germans were trying to occupy territory. The Soviets were trying to make that occupation impossible, and snipers were the perfect tool for this strategy. By November 1942, German forces controlled 90% of Stalingrad, including most of the factories, but they didn't control Stalingrad. Soviet forces held a strip of land never more than a few hundred meters deep along the Volga River, supplied by boats that crossed at night under German fire. This thin defensive line absorbed the Sixth Army's best efforts to eliminate it. German casualties mounted with horrifying speed. Companies that should have had 200 men were down to 50. Battalions ceased to exist as functional units. The meat grinder consumed men faster than replacements could arrive. And nowhere were casualties higher than among soldiers who showed themselves carelessly. German snipers, who had begun the battle as elite hunters, were now reduced to defensive positions, trying to protect their comrades from Soviet marksmen. The psychological transformation was complete. The hunters had become the hunted, and they knew it. German after-action reports from November paint a picture of declining morale specifically related to sniper activity. Soldiers refused to go into certain areas because everyone knew Soviet snipers dominated them. Officers couldn't observe the battlefield because looking over rubble with binoculars was suicide. German snipers who had once fired 20 or 30 rounds per day, confident in their superiority, now might fire 5 rounds per week, terrified of revealing their positions. The daily reality of sniper warfare in Stalingrad defied every principle of traditional combat. There were no front lines in the conventional sense. The same building might have Germans on the first floor, Soviets in the basement, and Germans again on the second floor. Snipers operated in this vertical maze, shooting down through holes in floors, up through holes in ceilings, horizontally through blown-out walls. The close quarters meant that many sniper shots were taken at ranges under 100 meters, distances where any reasonably trained rifleman could kill, negating German advantages in optics and training. Soviet snipers developed techniques specifically for these conditions. They created false positions, helmet on a stick, obvious and inviting, to draw German fire and reveal enemy locations. They used mirrors to observe around corners without exposing themselves. They learned to identify German snipers by their equipment, German optics, while superior, sometimes created distinctive scope glint that Soviet marksmen learned to recognize. They studied German behavior patterns, learning that Wehrmacht soldiers tended to check certain positions at certain times, that officers held briefings in relatively safe areas, that medics ran predictable routes to wounded soldiers. This intelligence, gained through patient observation, allowed Soviet snipers to set ambushes with devastating effectiveness. One documented incident illustrates the lethality of Soviet sniper tactics in Stalingrad. In early December 1942, a German company was occupying positions in the ruins of the Red October factory. Soviet intelligence identified that German officers held their morning briefing in what they considered a safe room, 50 meters behind the front line, accessed through a covered corridor. For 3 days, Soviet observers watched the pattern. Officers arrived between 0700 and 0730. Meeting lasted approximately 30 minutes. A Soviet sniper team led by a marksman named Anatoly Chekhov identified a firing position in factory machinery overlooking the briefing room. The position required crawling through a pipe barely wider than a man's shoulders, positioning in absolute darkness, and waiting motionless for hours. On the fourth morning, Chekhov shot through a gap in the wall, killing a German Hauptmann and wounding 2 other officers. The chaos that followed allowed Soviet storm groups to overrun 3 German positions while the company command structure was disrupted. This type of operation, impossible to execute in open terrain, became routine in Stalingrad. The city's destruction created firing positions that were literally invisible until the shot was fired, and by then, the shooter could vanish into the 3-dimensional maze. German attempts to counter Soviet sniper superiority took various forms, all ultimately inadequate. They tried bringing in more elite snipers, but these experts discovered that their training was nearly useless in urban ruins. They attempted systematic destruction of potential Soviet positions, but this was impossible because every pile of rubble was a potential position. They experimented with night operations, but Soviet defenders knew the terrain well enough to move in complete darkness. They tried using smoke to obscure movement, but wind in the ruined city was unpredictable, and smoke often revealed rather than concealed. Most desperately, they tried matching Soviet brutality with their own. German soldiers began mutilating bodies of Soviet snipers they killed, a war crime that violated Geneva Conventions, but reflected the terror these marksmen inspired. Soviet forces responded in kind, creating a cycle of atrocity that characterized Stalingrad's fighting. The Germans had entered the battle expecting to apply professional military expertise against a Soviet army they considered inferior, men under the inferior of men, which are called evil. They discovered instead that professionalism meant nothing when the enemy was willing to fight from inside burning buildings, to hold positions until annihilated, to treat every rubble as terrain worth dying for. The arrival of winter in November 1942 added another dimension of horror. Temperatures dropped to -20, -30 degrees Celsius. Both German and Soviet snipers now fought not just each other, but the cold. Frostbite became as dangerous as bullets. German snipers, equipped with uniforms designed for European climates, suffered terribly. Their scopes fogged in the cold. Their fingers became too numb to pull triggers reliably. Oil in their rifles froze, causing malfunctions. Soviet snipers, issued quilted jackets and felt boots, had better cold weather equipment, giving them another advantage. But both sides suffered equally from the cold's psychological effects. Men too cold to think clearly made mistakes. Exhaustion from shivering constantly degraded performance. The simple act of remaining still for hours in -30-degree cold required willpower beyond normal human limits. Yet the snipers endured because the alternative was worse. To abandon their positions was to give the enemy advantage, and in Stalingrad's zero-sum warfare, enemy advantage meant death for your comrades. Soviet sniper mythology was born in these frozen ruins. The Red Army's propaganda machine identified the sniper as the perfect symbol of resistance, the individual Soviet soldier, outgunned but unbowed, defeating Germans through superior spirit and skill. Newspaper articles celebrated top snipers by name. Vasily Zaitsev became a national hero, his face on posters, his tactics studied by soldiers across the Soviet Union. Other snipers achieved fame. Anatoly Chekhov, with 265 kills, Ivan Sidorenko, with 500 kills, and even female snipers, like Lyudmila Pavlichenko, who killed 309 enemy soldiers, though her service was in Sevastopol and Odessa, not Stalingrad itself. The Soviet sniper cult served multiple purposes. It boosted morale for defenders by providing heroes to emulate. It terrified Germans by personalizing their deaths. Every German soldier knew the names of Soviet snipers hunting them. And it sent a message to the world. The Soviet people would fight the fascist invaders with every weapon, in every way, until victory. Whether the exact kill counts were accurate is impossible to verify and ultimately irrelevant. What mattered was the psychological impact. Soviet soldiers believed they had super snipers who could kill Germans at will, and Germans believed it too. By January 1943, the German position in Stalingrad had become hopeless. The Soviet counteroffensive Operation Uranus had encircled the entire Sixth Army in November. German forces were starving, freezing, and running out of ammunition. The Luftwaffe's airlift efforts had failed to deliver sufficient supplies. Yet the fighting continued with undiminished intensity. German snipers in these final weeks fought not for victory, which was impossible, but for survival and revenge. Soviet snipers hunted with the knowledge that victory was close, that every German they killed hastened the end. The sniper war had devolved into something primitive and personal. Men tracking each other through frozen ruins, each kill a small victory in a battle that had long since lost any strategic meaning. The final German surrender on February 2, 1943, ended the most lethal urban battle in history. Of the 290,000 German troops surrounded in the pocket, only 91,000 survived to surrender. The rest had died in the ruins or frozen in the steppes. Soviet casualties were even higher. Estimates range from 750,000 to over 1 million military casualties, plus hundreds of thousands of civilians. The city itself had ceased to exist in any meaningful sense. 98% of buildings were destroyed or damaged beyond use. But Stalingrad's impact on military doctrine would echo for decades. The battle had demonstrated that urban warfare negated conventional military advantages. The Germans had superior training, superior equipment, superior doctrine, and they had lost. Soviet defenders, fighting with minimal resources in a destroyed city, had developed tactical innovations that would influence urban combat theory permanently. The swarm group concept would be studied by military forces worldwide. The integration of snipers into infantry tactics became standard in Soviet doctrine and was adopted by other armies. The recognition that a city's destruction could be a defensive advantage, counterintuitive but proven at Stalingrad, would influence how militaries approached urban combat. Most profoundly, Stalingrad demonstrated that morale and motivation could overcome material superiority. German soldiers fought for conquest, for Hitler, for an ideology that promised them mastery over inferior peoples. Soviet soldiers fought for their homes, for survival, for revenge against invaders who had destroyed everything they loved. That psychological difference, more than any tactical or technical factor, determined the battle's outcome. German snipers who survived Stalingrad returned to their units, changed men. They had entered the battle as elite specialists, confident in their superiority. They emerged, if they emerged at all, with shattered confidence and newfound respect for an enemy they had been taught to despise. Obergertreiter König, the sniper whose diary documented the battle, was evacuated with frostbite in January 1943. His final diary entry, written in a field hospital, "I was among Germany's best snipers. I had over 100 confirmed kills before Stalingrad. In 4 months of fighting there, I killed perhaps 20 Russians, though I can confirm only 12. They killed my spotter, wounded me twice, and hunted me every day. I never felt like a hunter in Stalingrad. I was prey." The Russians won not because they were better snipers in the traditional sense. They won because they understood that Stalingrad wasn't a battlefield. It was a killing maze, and they knew every path through it. We brought precision and discipline. They brought desperation and knowledge of the terrain. In that environment, desperation won. Soviet snipers who survived became the Red Army's elite, their tactics spreading across the Eastern Front. The lessons learned in Stalingrad's ruins would be applied in future urban battles. The reduction of Königsberg, the assault on Berlin, every Soviet offensive through German cities. The sniper, once a specialized role, became central to Soviet infantry doctrine. Every rifle company included trained snipers. Every soldier received basic marksmanship training, far exceeding pre-war standards. The cult of the sniper, born in Stalingrad's frozen ruins, became permanent Soviet military culture. Vasily Zaitsev survived the battle, went on to lead a sniper school, and trained thousands of Soviet marksmen in his methods. His students spread across the Red Army, each one carrying Stalingrad's lessons: patience, concealment, ruthlessness, and the understanding that in urban combat, the terrain itself is a weapon. Post-war Soviet military academies studied Stalingrad's sniper warfare extensively. The battle became the foundational text for urban combat doctrine, with detailed analysis of what worked, what failed, and why. The conclusion was consistent. In urban warfare, traditional advantages in firepower and technology matter less than intimate knowledge of terrain, willingness to fight at close quarters, and tactical flexibility. Western militaries, studying Stalingrad after the war, drew their own lessons. The United States Marine Corps' urban warfare doctrine, developed in the 1940s and 1950s, incorporated many principles pioneered by Soviet defenders. The recognition that snipers must be integrated into infantry operations, not separate specialized units. The importance of small unit leadership and initiative when fighting in complex terrain. The need for soldiers trained in close-quarters combat, not just open-field maneuver. Stalingrad had demonstrated that future wars would be increasingly urban, and that armies optimized for traditional warfare would struggle in cities. The Israeli Defense Forces, studying urban combat in the 1960s and 1970s, returned repeatedly to Stalingrad as a case study. Their doctrine for fighting in refugee camps in cities drew directly from Soviet innovations: the storm group concept, integrated sniper support, the use of existing structures as both weapons and obstacles. Even the United States' experience in Iraqi cities like Fallujah in the 2000s echoed Stalingrad's lessons. Urban warfare is fundamentally different from traditional combat, and the side that adapts faster usually wins. The legacy of Stalingrad's sniper warfare extends beyond tactical doctrine to fundamental questions about warfare's nature. The battle demonstrated that technology alone cannot guarantee victory. German forces had superior equipment in almost every category: better rifles, better optics, better training facilities, better supply systems. Yet they lost to an enemy fighting with inferior equipment, but superior motivation and terrain knowledge. This lesson challenged military establishments worldwide to reconsider how they prepared for war. If better equipment and training weren't sufficient, what was? Stalingrad suggested uncomfortable answers: willingness to accept casualties, adaptation to local conditions, and most controversially, the psychological factors of defending one's homeland versus invading someone else's. The German snipers who approached Stalingrad in August 1942 represented the pinnacle of professional military expertise. They were skilled, disciplined, and confident. The Soviet defenders they faced were often poorly trained, inadequately equipped, and desperate. Yet the Soviets won, not through superior skill, but through superior adaptation to an environment that rendered traditional skill irrelevant. In the ruins of Stalingrad, among the frozen corpses and shattered buildings, a new form of warfare was born. The sniper transformed from specialist hunter to integral infantry component. Urban combat evolved from obstacle to opportunity, and the myth of technological superiority was shattered against the reality that sometimes the most primitive advantages, knowing the terrain, fighting for survival, refusing to quit, matter more than all the training and equipment in the world. The German snipers who entered Stalingrad learned this lesson at terrible cost. Many never left the ruins. Those who survived carried physical and psychological scars for life. But their experience, documented in diaries, after-action reports, and post-war interviews, provided military historians with invaluable insights into how warfare was changing. The age of the lone sniper, patiently hunting from concealment, was ending. The age of the urban guerrilla, fighting from ruins with whatever weapons were available, was beginning. Stalingrad was the transition point. The battle that taught armies worldwide that future wars would look less like maneuver across open terrain and more like bitter struggles through destroyed cities. 70 years later, military snipers still study Stalingrad, not the propaganda versions with heroic duels and clean narratives, but the brutal reality documented in both Soviet and German archives. They study how environment shapes tactics, how desperation can overcome training, how psychological warfare matters as much as marksmanship. The lessons learned in those frozen ruins remain relevant because urban warfare remains humanity's deadliest form of combat. Every modern military faces the challenge Stalingrad posed. How do you fight effectively when every advantage you possess is negated by terrain, by an enemy who knows that terrain intimately, by civilians caught in the crossfire? The answers developed in Stalingrad aren't comfortable or clean, but they're honest. You adapt or you die. You fight close or you lose. You accept casualties or you fail. Urban warfare, as Stalingrad demonstrated conclusively, is warfare stripped to its essentials. Will against will, survival against annihilation, and the side that can endure the longest usually prevails. The Battle of Stalingrad was ultimately decided not by grand strategy or brilliant generalship, but by thousands of individual soldiers fighting in ruins for reasons that transcended logic. The snipers on both sides were the purest expression of this reality. Each shot was personal. Each kill mattered, not because it changed the strategic situation, but because it meant one more enemy who wouldn't kill you or your comrades. German snipers who had hunted across Europe discovered they were hunted in return, and the experience broke them. Soviet snipers who had been farmers and factory workers discovered they could kill professional soldiers, and the realization transformed them. Both sides learned that in Stalingrad there were no safe positions, no secure areas, no moments when death wasn't possible. The city became a vast killing ground where the only rule was survival, and the snipers were both predators and prey in a battle that consumed everyone it touched. That was Stalingrad's ultimate lesson. In total war, in urban warfare, there are no winners, only survivors. And sometimes, survival is victory enough.